Logan, a person like you doesn't deserve to call me mom. That's what my mother said after I refused to bail my younger brother out at the police station. What happened? Let me walk you through the story and tell you what I went through. Hello, everyone. My name is Logan. I'm 30 years old and living in Chicago. I'm a graphic designer, a job that demands talent and a lot of persistence. For the past few years, I've been living like a machine. Working from 9 to 6 was just the part people could see. The real grind happened during those long nights in front of the computer screen, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling from too much caffeine, to polish every last detail of a project. Then, one afternoon in late October 2023, my boss Richard called me into his office as the golden fall sunlight began streaming through the office windows. Richard, a 50-year-old man who rarely smiled, was different that day. When I walked in, he stood up with a rare look of satisfaction and said, "Logan, I've got some amazing news. The company has decided to promote you to senior creative director. Your salary will increase to $120,000 a year. On top of that, you're getting a $100,000 bonus for everything you've contributed over the past 6 years." As soon as Richard finished speaking, my entire world seemed to pause. In that moment, all those sleepless nights, all the times I turned down friends' invitations, the rushed breakfasts, and the late dinners felt worth it. This was proof that all my sacrifices hadn't been in vain. This was the ticket to the dream I'd held onto since the first day I set foot in Chicago, owning a home in the city. Over the past 6 years, I'd managed to save a pretty decent amount, and I also invested in stocks. When I heard about the extra $100,000 bonus, I knew that dream was about to come true. During the first week after receiving the good news, I spent all my free time researching Chicago's real estate market. Every evening after work, instead of working on freelance design projects like usual, I opened my laptop and scrolled through hundreds of listings on real estate websites. Chicago offered many options, from charming historic homes in Lincoln Park to sleek, modern townhouses in River North. But I wanted something special, a place that truly reflected my achievements. After carefully reviewing my finances, I realized I could afford to spend around $450,000 on my first home. On the first weekend of November, I started going to open houses. Sarah Martinez, a dynamic 40-year-old real estate agent with 15 years of experience in the field, joined me. As we stood in front of the first home in the Lakeview neighborhood, Sarah turned to me with a professional smile and said, "Logan, this area is hot right now. Home prices here have gone up 15% in the past year." Right then, I realized that buying a house wasn't just about finding a place to live. It was also a significant investment for the future. Over the next 2 weeks, we viewed more than 20 different houses. Some were too small for what I had in mind, some were too old and needed major renovations, and some were beautiful but way over budget. By the third week of November, as the Chicago wind began to carry the chill of winter, Sarah called me unusually excitedly. When I picked up, she said, "Logan, I found an amazing house in Albany Park. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a garage, and a backyard. It's listed at $340,000. Still within your budget, and the neighborhood is growing fast." As soon as I heard her words, I knew this was the house I'd been looking for. And at that price, I'd even have room in the budget to renovate and decorate it exactly how I wanted. And just 1 month later, I finalized the purchase of that house. After finalizing my house purchase, I decided to visit my family and share the good news. On the drive from Chicago to the suburbs, I brought a box of pastries from my mom's favorite bakery, hoping it would make the evening a little more special. As soon as I got to the house, I headed straight to the kitchen to start dinner. I decided to make pasta carbonara, a dish everyone in the family loved, and I opened a bottle of red wine that my dad rarely enjoyed. As the food scent started filling the house, Mom walked into the kitchen with a curious look and asked, "Logan, why are you cooking tonight? Is there something special going on?" I turned around with a mysterious smile and replied, "Just wanted the whole family to sit together. It's been a while since we had a warm dinner like this." I looked at each familiar face when everyone gathered around the dinner table. Dad, Daniel, sat at the head of the table looking unusually relaxed. Mom, Nancy, smiled in approval at the nicely plated dishes. Blake watched me with curious eyes. After raising my glass and taking a small sip of wine to build courage, I looked them all in the eyes and announced, "I have some great news to share. I just bought my first home in Chicago." Right then, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Instead of the congratulations I had hoped for, Dad adjusted his glasses and said with concern, A house in Chicago? That sounds expensive, son. I'm worried you might be spending beyond your means. Immediately after, Mom sighed and added, clearly displeased, Logan, I get that you want your own life, but did it ever occur to you to use that money to help the family? This roof needs urgent repairs, and Blake still needs support from the college. Before I could respond, Blake jumped into the conversation, eyes lit up and said, a new house. That's awesome, Logan. I'm gonna stay for a few days. I want a taste of that fancy lifestyle. I'll take some pictures for Instagram. My friends will be so jealous. Mom nodded in agreement and added, exactly, Logan. A new house should be shared with family. I think you should let Blake move in with you. At that moment, I clenched my glass so tightly that my knuckles turned white, trying to keep a smile on my face while an empty feeling spread through my chest. It hit me, sharp and painful. Not one said congratulations. No one expressed pride or joy over the biggest accomplishment of my life. All they cared about was how they could benefit from my success. On the drive home, childhood memories flooded like a slow-motion movie. I remembered my first year of college, when my old laptop started breaking down. The screen had these weird lines across it, and the keyboard would randomly stop working. I sat down with my parents and asked for help getting a new laptop, which was essential for my studies. As I explained the situation and asked for support, Dad looked at me over his glasses and said, Logan, you need to learn how to save money. If you want a new laptop, save up and buy it yourself. I felt disappointed, but I tried to understand where he came from. But just a few months later, my parents gave Blake, who was only 12 then, a brand new gaming console for no special reason. I can still remember Blake's joyful laughter as he opened the box. I stood in the corner of the room, watching the whole scene unfold, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut. Moments like that became familiar. I got used to stepping back, figuring things out independently, and sacrificing without complaint. Phrases like, Logan's the older one, he needs to set an example, or, a son should be more independent, became the standard response anytime I needed something. Tired of watching that unfairness play out, I moved into the college dorms. I still remember the night I sat with my parents to discuss it. After building my courage, I looked them in the eyes and said, I want to move into the dorms. It'll be more convenient for school, and I want to try living independently. Almost strangely, Dad looked at me calmly and replied, if that's what you want, we won't stop you, but don't expect any help from us. You'll be completely responsible for that choice. After he spoke, Mom just nodded in agreement without saying a word. Their reaction didn't surprise me, but this strange emptiness was still pressing down on my chest. They didn't argue, protest, or even try to talk me out of it. They accepted my decision effortlessly, like my leaving didn't matter. In that moment, I understood something clearly. To them, I was just a burden they were ready to let go of. The next day, I packed up my possessions, the few possessions I owned, and moved into the dorms. It wasn't a luxurious or comfortable space, but at least it gave me a sense of freedom. I no longer had to witness Blake being spoiled or carry the weight of their expectations anymore. Life in the dorms wasn't easy, mainly since I chose to work while studying to cover my expenses. During the day, I rushed from one class to another, and at night I worked at a coffee shop near campus. Some nights, even after finishing my shift at 11 p.m., I had to return to my room and dive into assignments to meet deadlines. My parents called occasionally, but the conversations were always short and superficial. Their questions only revolved around school. No one asked if I was tired or how I managed life alone. Whenever I hung up, the distance between me and my family grew wider, like we were only staying connected out of obligation. I hoped they'd check in on me or offer to help, but that never happened. I learned to stop expecting that kind of care. Instead, I focused on my goals and reminded myself that I was building my future, even if I had to do it without them by my side. The day I graduated from college was a significant milestone in my life. After years of juggling classes and work, staying up late to meet deadlines, and working part-time to cover rent, I finally did it. Not long after, I landed my first job at a graphic design firm with a decent salary, enough to pay rent and start putting some money aside. What surprised me was how my parents suddenly seemed more interested in my life once I started working. They began calling more often, inviting me home for dinner. Family meals became more frequent, and for a while I genuinely enjoyed those brief moments of connection. But before long, the conversations at the dinner table started to shift. One evening, Mom looked at me concernedly and said, Logan, the roof needs repairs, and we don't have enough money. Can you help us out a little? I immediately realized their sudden interest had a specific reason behind it. Even though I still carried a heavy feeling inside, I believed helping them wasn't just an act of support, but also a way to show gratitude. I didn't do it out of pressure or obligation. I chose to do it because I wanted to hold on to my sense of kindness and ensure the past didn't harden the person I was trying to become. When Blake started college, everything suddenly seemed to revolve around making his life as comfortable as possible. One evening during a family dinner, my parents suggested that Blake needed a car to get around more easily. While I was enjoying my plate of pasta, Dad suddenly turned to me and said, "Logan, could you buy a car for Blake? Something around $3,000 doesn't have to be anything fancy." I nearly choked on my food. I had taken the bus to school for all 4 years of college, enduring freezing Chicago mornings and overcrowded rides. And now they were asking me to buy Blake a car, like it was just a given and somehow my responsibility. When I voiced my disagreement, Mom jumped in with a scolding tone. "Logan, you're his older brother. You should help him. Blake needs support, and the family doesn't have the money to cover it." Faced with such an unreasonable request, I sighed and tried to explain that a car was beyond what I could afford at the time, and that I had responsibilities of my own to handle. But my refusal didn't end the conversation. My parents began criticizing me, calling me selfish and accusing me of not caring about the family. No matter how I tried to explain, their opinion didn't change. After days of thinking it over, I decided to support Blake in a way that felt more reasonable to me. I bought him a new laptop, something I knew he needed for school. When I gave him the laptop, I hoped Blake would understand that this was how I showed I cared about his education and future. Blake seemed genuinely grateful when he received the gift, but my parents still weren't entirely satisfied with my decision. That's when I realized that no matter what I did, I would always fall short of their expectations. But at least I had chosen to help in a way that aligned with what I believed was right. As I was still lost in the stream of memories, I suddenly realized I had driven home without even noticing. After parking the car, I entered that familiar space, my house, where I always felt the most at peace. In the following days, I poured my energy into decorating every corner of the home, from choosing curtains that complemented the natural light to picking out minimalist artwork for the walls. I wanted this space to be an accurate reflection of who I was. The house gradually became my favorite place, a quiet refuge in a busy neighborhood. But that peace didn't last long. Blake started texting me constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, with messages like, "When are you going to show me the new house?" Or, "Are you being stingy with me? Scared I'll mess it up?" Those texts made me laugh a little, leaving me feeling slightly drained. Maybe Blake was just curious, but the way he kept pressing felt like a subtle pressure I didn't ask for. Instead of replying immediately, I put my phone aside and returned to hanging up a few more decorations. I reminded myself, this is my space, and I have the right to decide who gets to be part of it. After days of receiving texts from Blake and repeated requests from my parents, I realized that constantly saying no wasn't getting me anywhere. Eventually, I decided to host a small get-together at my house to ease tensions with the family while setting clear boundaries about my personal space. That evening, when Blake stepped inside, he shouted excitedly, "Wow, this place is even nicer than I imagined. Logan, you're living the high life." Mom looked around, her eyes scanning every detail. Even though she seemed impressed, she didn't miss the chance to comment, "Why didn't you get a bigger dining table? If you have guests over, there won't be enough seats." I just smiled, trying to keep the mood light. The small gathering went relatively smoothly, but I couldn't ignore the curious glances from my parents or Blake's over-the-top enthusiasm as he explored every corner of the house. Blake kept marveling at everything, touching the furniture like he was assessing how much this space could benefit him. He was especially drawn to the spacious living room and the entertainment area. When everyone finally left, I felt a sense of relief. I thought I had fulfilled my duty and hoped it would satisfy them. At that moment, I had no idea that letting Blake see the house would turn into a decision I'd regret. One Saturday, not long after my parents and Blake visited, I came home from a long day at work, looking forward to peace in my own space. But as I approached my front door, I heard loud music blasting down the block. My heart started racing when I realized the noise was coming inside my house. I opened the door and was immediately hit by chaos. Blake and his friends were laughing, drinking beer, and blasting music at an unbearable level. Snack wrappers, empty beer cans, and plastic cups were scattered everywhere. I froze, trying to suppress the wave of anger rising inside me. As soon as Blake saw me, He turned around with a wide grin, as if nothing was wrong, and said, "Hey, Logan, my friends wanted to check out your awesome house. I figured it'd be fine." Felt like I'd just been slapped. He spoke like his actions were no big deal, but all I could feel was blatant disrespect. I tried to hold back, but my voice cracked with frustration as I shouted, "This isn't your house, and it's not a place for you to throw parties. Everyone needs to leave. Now." Reluctantly, Blake and his friends began cleaning up and heading out after I mentioned calling the police. But as I closed the door behind them, a tightness and fury grew in my chest. Right then and there, I knew this wasn't over, and I needed to take firm action to protect my space. Furious over what Blake had done, I called my parents that night. I hoped they would listen, maybe even take my side, or at the very least, scold Blake so he'd understand that his behavior was completely out of line. As soon as Mom answered, I kept my voice steady and said, "Mom, I need to talk about something." Blake entered my house without permission and threw a party with his friends. I can't accept that kind of behavior. I waited, expecting an apology or at least some kind of sympathy. But instead, Mom scolded, "Logan, can't you be more generous with your brother? He's just a kid trying to have a little fun. The way you're acting makes you sound selfish." Right after that, Dad chimed in with a firm voice, "I agree. You live alone, you've got more than Blake ever has, but you refuse to share. You're disappointing us. You only think about yourself and never about the family." I was stunned into silence. They didn't acknowledge the hard work I had put into building my own life, nor did they even mention that what Blake did was wrong. Overwhelmed, I said, "This is my house, and I get to decide who's allowed in. If it happens again, I won't hesitate to call the police." There was a pause on the line, and then Mom sighed deeply and said, "You're heartless, Logan. You have no sense of family." With that, I hung up, hands trembling with anger. Not just at Blake, but at the blatant favoritism and the constant pressure my parents had always put on me. That was also the moment I decided to protect my boundaries, even if it meant enduring harsh criticism from my own family. 2 weeks after the incident, my parents called and invited me over for dinner. Mom's voice was softer, like she was trying to ease the tension between me and the family. When I picked up, she spoke gently, "Logan, why don't you come home for dinner this weekend? We'll cook all your favorite dishes." I took a deep breath and responded calmly, "Sorry, Mom, but I must travel for work this weekend. Things have been hectic lately. Let's plan for another time." She sighed, with a faint tone of disappointment, but didn't push any further. After hanging up, I told myself I'd made the right decision by declining. In the following days, I stayed entirely focused on my business trip. The packed schedule, from early morning to late at night, left no room to think about anything else. On Saturday evening, my phone rang just after finishing an important meeting and heading back to the hotel. It was an unknown number. The serious voice on the other end made my skin crawl when I answered, "Hello, this is the Chicago Police Department. We need you to return immediately. There's been an incident at your residence." Trying to stay calm, though I couldn't hide the worry in my voice, I asked, "What happened? Who's at my house?" The officer continued, "Your brother, Blake, correct? According to reports, he threw a large party with his friends. Neighbors complained about the noise. A fight broke out between Blake and one of them. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, but the situation got out of control." Hearing those words, I felt like the ground dropped out from under me. Despite my previous warning, Blake had again found his way into my house. This time, he didn't just invade my personal space. He dragged the neighbors into the chaos too. I was overwhelmed with anger and disappointment. I thanked the officer, promised to return immediately, and hung up. Sitting in the hotel room, I gripped my phone tightly, torn between emotions. I blamed myself for not being more careful about securing my home, and now I was paying the price for that oversight. I knew I couldn't let this go on. Blake had crossed every line, and I was determined to take firm action this time. There would be no more compromise. Even as my parents kept calling and texting, urging me to return immediately and deal with the situation, I chose not to rush. This trip was important, and Blake needed to face the consequences of his actions. When I called the police back and informed them I'd be delayed, I spoke firmly over the phone. "Let this be a lesson for my brother." At that moment, I let Blake handle the fallout on his own. After finishing my work, I took the earliest flight back to Chicago, exhausted and unable to relax. My mind was weighed down by the mess waiting for me. When I arrived at the police station, They led me to an interrogation room. Blake was already there, sitting with a face that showed zero remorse. When he saw me, he smirked and said, "You've got such a nice house, and you're not even using it to its full potential. What's the harm in me using it?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a deep breath to hide my anger and replied, "It's not your house. You have no right to use it, let alone throw a party and drag the neighbors into your mess." A few seconds later, the officer beside me shook his head and added, "We questioned him earlier, and he claimed the house was his to avoid taking responsibility. But we've confirmed that you're the legal owner." Hearing that felt like a direct hit to my dignity. Blake hadn't just violated my personal space. He had shamelessly lied to dodge accountability. When I turned toward Mom, sitting next to Blake, she looked at me pleadingly and said, "Logan, you have to help your brother with this. He's still young. He doesn't understand. If you don't help him, who will?" I laughed bitterly and replied with thinly veiled sarcasm, "Right, Mom, Blake is young, but that doesn't mean he gets a free pass from consequences." I warned everyone, but no one listened. My parents kept trying to persuade me, attempting to shift the responsibility onto me like they always had. But this time I was ready. This time I wasn't backing down. A moment later, I looked Blake straight in the eye and said clearly, "You're going to face the consequences of your actions. I'm not paying a single cent to clean up your mess." Then I turned to the officer and said, "You can proceed however necessary. I have no intention of dropping any charges." The air in the room turned heavy. My mom looked at me like I just committed an unforgivable sin, but I didn't care anymore. This was my final boundary, and I wouldn't let it be crossed again. With a serious expression, the officer laid a file on the table and looked me in the eye. "We've reviewed the situation. Given Blake and his friend's actions, public disturbance, and a physical altercation with neighbors, we're obligated to impose appropriate penalties." As the officer spoke, I saw a flicker of worry flash across Blake's face. Seconds later, he flipped a few pages and continued, "Blake will be fined for disturbing the peace and causing a public nuisance. In addition, the affected neighbors have decided to file a formal complaint. We cannot overlook this matter. It will be referred to court for proper legal proceedings." Immediately, Mom cut in with a panicked voice, "Officer, he's just a kid. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. Please don't make this more serious than it has to be." The officer shook his head and replied, "Ma'am, this isn't a minor issue. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, whether child or adult. This will be an important lesson." I sat silently, watching everything unfold. The tension was undeniable, but I deeply agreed with the officer's decision. Blake had gone too far, and things would only worsen if he didn't face the consequences now. Finally, the officer turned to me and said, "Mr. Logan, we'll complete the paperwork and send you an official notice. I appreciate your cooperation." I nodded and responded calmly but resolutely, "Thank you, officer. I believe this is necessary for my brother to understand the importance of owning up to his actions." With that decision, it felt like I had finally shut the last door leading back to the painful parts of my past. After the police informed us that Blake would be held until someone posted bail, my parents sprang into action. Even though they didn't have enough money, they began calling relatives and friends to borrow what they needed. I stood silently off to the side, saying nothing. I had warned them before, and I wouldn't change my decision. When Blake was finally released and the family left the station, my parents' fury erupted in the parking lot. Mom shouted, tears streaming down her face, "Logan, how could you be so heartless? Your brother was in trouble, and you didn't lift a finger to help. Do you even consider us family anymore?" Then, just as furious, Dad yelled, "You only care about yourself. You always think you're right. Blake is still young. When he makes mistakes, he needs guidance, not rejection. How could you turn your back on your brother like that?" I stood there, trying to keep my emotions in check while disappointment boiled beneath the surface. I replied, calmly but with a weariness in my voice that was impossible to miss, "I warned everyone. I allowed Blake to learn from his mistakes, but no one listened. Now you're blaming me, but you've been enabling him all along. This cycle will never end if Blake isn't held accountable." Immediately, Mom stomped her foot, eyes blazing with rage, and snapped, "Logan, someone like you doesn't deserve to call me Mom. When your family needed you, all you did was walk away." I gave a bitter laugh, realizing there was nothing I could say that would ever be enough. I looked at her and said, "If being family means I have to keep tolerating this kind of injustice, then maybe I need to rethink what that word means." The tension escalated to the point where no one could even look each other in the eye. I turned and walked away, leaving behind my mother's accusations and my father's angry stare. As I got into my car and drove off, I knew this relationship had reached its breaking point and would never return to how it used to be. When I returned home and opened the door, a wave of emotion hit me instantly. The scene was a disaster. Empty beer bottles, trash scattered everywhere, overturned furniture, and mysterious stains on the floor and the sofa. The space I once considered my sanctuary now looked like a battlefield. I stood still for a few minutes, overwhelmed by a mix of rage and exhaustion. I couldn't bear to leave the house in that state any longer, so I immediately called an emergency cleaning service. When the cleaners arrived that night, I sat quietly in a corner, watching as they tried to restore what was left of my living space. Once everything was clean again, I sank into the sofa. The dim glow of the lamp made the room look calm, but inside, I felt nothing but chaos. I closed my eyes, but the images of everything that had happened kept flashing. For years, I worked tirelessly, believing that if I pushed myself harder and achieved more, my parents would love me more and finally acknowledge everything I had done. But reality proved me wrong. Blake could make mistake after mistake and be forgiven instantly. Meanwhile, I was branded as selfish and cold-hearted when I stood up to protect my boundaries. I felt sad, disappointed, and above all, empty. But I also realized that I couldn't keep hoping for love and recognition from my parents to appear if I just tried harder magically. The only thing I could control was living according to my values and maintaining firm boundaries. I took a deep breath and decided I would deal with the mess Blake created this time. I'd offer support to help him settle debts or address the issues with the people involved. But after that, I would never allow him again unless he was invited. The next morning, I woke up early, and the first thing I did was reach out to the neighbors who had to endure the chaos caused by the party. I knocked on the door of the house next door, which seemed to have been affected the most. A middle-aged man answered, his face lined with frustration. When he opened the door, I introduced myself. I'm Logan, the house owner next door. I sincerely apologize for everything my younger brother and his friends did. I want to make this right and gladly compensate for any damage or disturbance your family endured. The man folded his arms and replied coldly, an apology isn't enough. My family didn't just lose sleep. You think a simple sorry or a bit of money can fix this? I've made my decision. I'm taking Blake and his friends to court. Hearing that, a heavy weight pressed on my chest, but I stayed calm and said, I understand your frustration. If there's anything I can do to support you, I'm willing to cooperate. I'm not making excuses for his actions, but genuinely want to make things right. If possible, I'd like to take responsibility on his behalf and resolve this without dragging it into a legal battle. The conversation went on for over 20 minutes. At first, he was firm in his decision, but fortunately, he eventually softened. He agreed not to proceed with the lawsuit, on the condition that Blake and his friends apologize in person and cover all repair or compensation costs. By the end of the conversation, he said, I'm giving you this chance, but if they don't follow through, I won't back down next time. I nodded and thanked him sincerely before leaving. After convincing the neighbor to change his mind, I felt a small sense of relief. Still, I knew I couldn't handle everything alone. Blake and his friends needed to take responsibility for what they had done, and the first step was for them to apologize. I picked up my phone and called Mom first. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. I tried calling Dad and then Blake, but got the same result. They didn't pick up or respond to any of my calls. I sighed, guessing they were still angry at me for refusing to bail Blake out at the station. I wasn't surprised, but being ignored like this still left a bitter taste in my mouth. With no other option, I left a message for each of them. I just spoke with the neighbor. They agreed not to sue Blake and his friends, but only if Blake and the group apologize in person. I've done everything possible to resolve this, but the rest is on Blake now. Please call or text me as soon as possible. I set the phone down, my chest heavy. Even though I had done everything in my power, it still felt like I was walking a tightrope alone. While the situation seemed momentarily under control, I knew problems like this would continue unless Blake took responsibility and made a fundamental change. The next day, after a long day at work, I sank into the sofa, savoring the peace in my now clean home. I closed my eyes, trying to relax, when a sudden knock at the door made me sit up. Opening the door, I saw the neighbor from yesterday standing there, a gentle smile on his usually stern face. As soon as he saw me, he greeted me, Hi Logan. I wanted to share something with you. I invited him in, feeling a mix of curiosity and concern. Sitting across from me, he began explaining, Blake came by this morning to apologize, along with your parents. They explained that Blake's friends refused to cooperate, but at least he owned up to what happened and made an effort to make things right. I've decided to let it go because you went above and beyond to handle it responsibly. Hearing that made me feel relieved, though I couldn't fully relax yet. I thanked him for his understanding and willingness to forgive. But before I could say anything else, he smiled unexpectedly and added, My family's having a small dinner this weekend. If you're free, I'd love to invite you. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to introduce you to my sister. She just moved to the area, and I think you two might get along. His invitation caught me off guard, but pleasantly so. After all the tension and chaos I'd just been through, the thought of a warm dinner with new people sounded incredibly appealing. I replied with a soft smile, Thank you. I'll rearrange my schedule and be there. For the first time in days, I felt things were finally starting to shift positively. And I realized that sometimes, when one door closes, it opens the way to paths you never imagined. After everything that had happened, I understood that the cycle would only continue if I didn't take steps to protect myself. So I immediately ensured this home became my private, safe space. The next day, I called a trusted locksmith and asked him to replace every lock in the house. When he arrived, I stayed nearby, watching every step as he worked, feeling a little more relieved with each old lock he removed. When the job was done, he handed me a brand new set of keys. Holding them in my hand, I told myself, from now on, I'm truly in control of this space. It's been 2 years since that day, and I still haven't seen my family. We haven't spoken, no calls, no messages. That silence hurt at first, but I realized it was necessary over time. I needed distance to start healing the wounds inside me. Since then, my life has changed completely. I've learned how to live for myself, without needing to prove anything or sacrifice myself for anyone else. My career has flourished. I was promoted to creative director and now have a stable income. My house is now truly a home. I've decorated it exactly the way I want, welcomed friends over, and thoroughly enjoyed the peace I once had to fight so hard to protect. Now and then, I still wonder if my parents and Blake are doing okay, if they're happy. But I also understand that not every relationship is meant to be saved. Sometimes, letting go is the kindest thing you can do for yourself. I've learned that family isn't just about shared blood. True family is made up of those who choose to stand by you, who respect you, and who love you unconditionally. Sitting in the home I fought to protect, with a heart no longer weighed down like before, I realized that sometimes, finding true happiness means having the courage to walk away from the things hurting you. I'm sharing this story for anyone going through something similar. Those who feel overlooked, pressured, or taken advantage of by their family. You're not alone in that struggle. Setting boundaries with family can be the hardest thing you'll ever do, but sometimes it's also the most necessary. No one has the right to take advantage of your kindness, not even the people closest to you. True happiness comes from living in alignment with your values, not trying to please those who never truly appreciated you. If you're in a similar situation, remember, you deserve to be respected and loved. Don't be afraid to say no to unreasonable demands, even if they come from your family. Your life is yours. Live it in a way that makes you proud. That's the end of my story. But before I go, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me until the very last words, have you ever experienced favoritism in your family? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Feel free to share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Take care and see you next time. I had assembled a grand Christmas party that cost me $3,000 and invited 30 of my closest family members. But when the time came, not a single person showed up. Instead, I found out they were all gathered at my brother's house, laughing and having a good time as if I never existed. That was the final straw after 28 years of being mistreated by my family. But luckily, there was one person who saw everything, my grandfather. And the decision he made in the days that followed completely changed my life and forced the entire family to pay a heavy price for the way they treated me. The story I'm about to tell might make you think I'm being cruel, but hear me out and you can decide who the real villain is. Hello, everyone. My name is Max. I'm 28 years old and currently the head of sales at a major real estate company based in Austin, Texas. From the outside looking in, you'd probably think I have it all. a stable six-figure job, a luxury apartment overlooking the Colorado River, and the youth to enjoy it all. But behind that picture of success, I live alone in a 15th floor apartment in East Austin, a place I bought just 3 months ago for one reason: to escape my toxic family and a bunch of greedy relatives. It might sound harsh to call my family toxic, right? But once you hear my whole story, you'll understand why I had to make that painful decision. My story took place 7 months ago, during last year's Christmas season. At the time, it felt like the happiest moment of my career. After 3 years of working tirelessly at the company, I was finally promoted to head of sales, a position I had dreamed about for a long time. The moment I got the official notice from the board, I was overwhelmed with emotion. My new salary had crossed the six-figure mark, and with it came limitless opportunities for advancement. I had proven my worth and capabilities for the first time. Caught up in that excitement, an idea suddenly came to me. I should throw a Christmas party at my place to share this joy with my family and relatives. Deep down, I knew my relationship with the family wasn't exactly smooth, but I saw this as a chance to show them how far I'd come, a way to express my growth and success. After thinking it through for 3 days, I decided to host the family Christmas party that year. 1 week before Christmas, I started making calls to invite everyone. The first call was to Aunt Sophia. My voice was excited as I asked her to the party at my home. As soon as Aunt Sophia said she'd come, I moved on to Uncle Robert and my cousins. Interestingly, I never mentioned the promotion. I wanted that to be a surprise, something I'd share in the warmth and togetherness of the evening. The responses from everyone honestly took me by surprise, in a good way. Everyone sounded excited and eager to come. Aunt Maria promised to bring her famous cheesecake. Uncle Thompson said he'd be there with his family, including his 3 little kids. Even some of the more distant relatives I barely kept in touch with confirmed they'd make time to attend. After my last call, I sat down and counted the confirmed guests. Nearly 30 people said they were coming. That number was way more than I ever expected. At that moment, I felt like a kid counting down to his birthday. After I finished inviting the relatives, I finally made the calls to my parents and my older brother, Brian. I spent a lot of time debating whether I should ask them. Brian was their pride and joy, their golden child in my family. As I sat there staring at my guest list, I hesitated over the last 3 names: Dad, Mom, Brian. I knew it would be seen as a primary offense if I left them out. They'd accuse me of disrespecting the family. In the end, I decided to invite them. I called Dad first. When I mentioned the party, he responded in his usual dry tone, "Why aren't you having it at your parents' house?" Then I called Mom. Her reaction wasn't much better. She replied vaguely, "I don't know yet. If I have time, I might stop by." The last call was to Brian. After hearing the invitation, he asked skeptically, "You're hosting it at your place? Do you even have enough space and stuff to keep everyone entertained?" After those calls, I felt uneasy and unsure. Their cold responses brought back a flood of unpleasant childhood memories. Brian is 2 years older than I. Ever since we were kids, our parents showed blatant favoritism toward him. You could see it in all the little details of daily life. He always got new stuff while I had to use his hand-me-downs, books, school supplies, even his old bike, laptop, and later on, his clothes. I still remember our birthday celebrations. Every year, Brian's birthday was a full-blown event. Our parents would invite all his friends, order a custom cake from a fancy bakery, and get him expensive gifts, from the latest gaming consoles to high-end sports gear. In contrast, my birthdays were just quiet family dinners. No decorations, no friends, just a store-bought cake and a few small presents. When I once asked why my birthdays weren't like Brian's, Mom always said, "You don't have as many friends as Brian. Besides, you're not into noisy crowds." The favoritism became even clearer when it came to school. I worked hard and consistently got straight A's, while Brian only managed average grades. Instead of praising me, our parents would excuse him. "Brian's busy with extracurriculars. He doesn't have time to study." Every time Brian brought home a poor report card, they'd find a way to justify it. But the one time I got a B in chemistry, they questioned why I wasn't trying harder. That unfair treatment became deeply rooted in me from a young age. Brian had a way with words. He always knew how to say the right things to make people happy, especially Mom, Dad, and our relatives. Whenever someone visited, he'd show up with a big smile, ask about their health, compliment the aunts on their outfits, or remember everyone's birthday. Those little gestures made everyone love him. Thanks to all that praise, my parents spent tens of thousands of dollars on Brian over the years. When he wanted to attend an expensive private school, they didn't hesitate. When he tried to join a summer trip to Europe, they forked out 15 grand without blinking. But me, I was the quiet one. I liked books and preferred being alone. That only made my parents compare us even more. Why can't you be more like Brian? Why don't you know how to talk to people like he does? They said no when I asked them to pay for a summer coding course that cost $3,000. Why bother with coding? You should focus on your regular schoolwork. Sitting there in silence after those phone calls, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake inviting them. But then I thought, maybe this was my chance to prove something, to show them that I, too, could be successful, that I wasn't the failure they'd always seen me as. And I threw the most unforgettable party to show them how far I had come. Even though I had invited everyone else, there was still one name on my list I hadn't called yet. My grandfather, David. When I saw his name, I decided I wouldn't call him like the others. The next day, after work, I drove from Austin to Rollingwood, a quiet area about 20 minutes away. I carried a bottle of premium Kentucky bourbon, which I knew he loved. It wasn't just a gift. It was my way of showing love and gratitude. As soon as I pulled up in front of his warm, wooden house, I saw him waiting on the porch. Even at 80 years old, my grandfather was impressively strong and sharp. He still cared for himself and never needed help from anyone in the family. He had Grace by his side these days, a housekeeper who had been with our family for nearly 10 years. But Grace was more than help. She was his companion. She handled the heavy tasks like cleaning and shopping, and sometimes kept him company during quiet evenings. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with the warm smile I always missed. He hugged me tightly, like we hadn't seen each other in months, even though I had just visited him 2 weeks ago. A little later, we sat down on the porch, in the same spot where he usually read the morning paper. When I told him I'd been promoted to head of sales, his face lit up with pride. Right then, he placed his hand gently on my head and gave it a soft rub, a gesture he'd done since I was a kid. With a voice full of emotion and sincerity, he said, "Max, I'm truly proud of you. I always knew you were going to do great things." After that, I invited him to my Christmas party. As soon as I mentioned it, he smiled and said he'd be there. No hesitation, no questions, just pure support. Before I left, he stood beside my car window and said, "I'll be there, and I'm bringing a special gift for you." In that moment, I felt something warm settle in my chest. No matter what else happened, I knew I had at least one person who genuinely cared and believed in me. The week I spent preparing for that Christmas party was the most effort and heart I had ever poured into a family event. I wanted everything perfect, from the tiniest details to the overall atmosphere. First, I ordered food from a high-end restaurant specializing in traditional Christmas dishes. The menu included golden roasted turkey with crispy skin, aromatic stuffing with rosemary and sausage, silky mashed potatoes loaded with butter and cream, and a fresh Caesar salad topped with shaved Parmesan and crunchy croutons. I went with a classic pumpkin pie and a tall, multi-layered chocolate cake covered in glossy dark ganache for dessert. But I didn't stop there. I hired a professional decorating team to transform my home into a true Christmas wonderland. They strung warm-colored LED lights across the living room, creating a cozy, romantic ambience. The centerpiece was an 8-foot Christmas tree in the corner, dressed with shimmering silver and gold ornaments and elegant red velvet ribbons. Twinkling string lights wrapped around the window frames, giving off a soft, star-like glow. On top of all that, I set aside a special budget to buy gifts for the kids in the family: Xbox games, fully accessorized Barbie sets, complex and fun Lego kits, and a few cuddly teddy bears. When I added everything up, the total came close to $3,000, which made me pause for a moment. But I saw it as a worthy investment in creating a beautiful memory with my family. I wanted them to know I had grown up, was financially capable, and learned how to care for the people I loved. The night before the party, I stood in the living room, taking everything I had put together. In that moment, my heart was hopeful that this would be a significant Christmas celebration. I had no idea that the real storm awaited me the next day. On the day of the Christmas party, I went over every detail one last time, from how the food was arranged to adjusting the lighting to ensure everything felt just right. Everything was perfect and ready for the guests. The party was set to start at 5 p.m. By 4:30, I had wrapped up the final touches and was waiting there. No one had shown up at exactly 5 o'clock, the time I had shared with everyone. The food was laid out beautifully. The house was glowing with Christmas warmth, and yet it was utterly silent. A sense of unease began creeping into my mind, but I tried to stay calm. I picked up my phone and made a few calls to check in. The first call was to Aunt Sophia. She answered after 3 rings and responded in a rushed voice. I'm on my way. Just stuck in traffic. Then she hung up. Next, I reached Uncle Robert. He immediately said in an apologetic tone, Max, I'll be there in about 15 minutes. Just finished up some work. The last call was to my mom. When I asked why no one had arrived yet, she casually replied, we're on our way. It's still early, don't worry. They all said they were coming. So I let out a small sigh of relief and decided to wait a bit longer. By 5:30, not a single person had shown up. That's when I started to feel genuinely anxious. I called again, one by one. But this time, something strange happened. No one picked up. That rising sense of worry turned into a cold wave inside me. Something wasn't right. A few minutes later, my phone rang, startling me. I looked down and saw my grandfather's name on the screen. I picked up right away. Before I could say much, he asked with a puzzled voice, Max, the party already started. Why aren't you here yet? That question hit me like lightning. I froze, completely confused. I quickly replied, what do you mean, Grandpa? I'm still at home waiting for everyone. After a short silence, he asked again, this time sounding surprised, didn't you ask your mom to let everyone know the party would be held at Brian's place? Hearing that, I shot back, stunned and entirely thrown off. Are you serious? I never said that. I never asked her to do that. There was a pause on the other end before he finally responded, I see. Now everything makes sense. After he hung up, the whole picture started to come together in my mind, and a flood of anger mixed with heartbreak began to rise inside me. While trying to process what had just happened in that call with my grandfather, my phone suddenly buzzed with a notification. I glanced down and saw Brian's name in my Instagram alerts. With trembling hands, I opened the app and saw the photo he had just posted. A grand Christmas party at his house. In the picture, I could see every single person I had invited. Aunt Sophia was laughing brightly, Uncle Robert had a glass of wine in hand, and all my cousins and their kids were there. Everyone looked happy, joyful, like they were exactly where they wanted to be. In that moment, a sickening wave of betrayal crashed over me, wiping out every ounce of hope I'd been holding on to. These people I had spent the entire week preparing for, buying gifts, ordering food, hiring decorators, had coldly and deliberately excluded me. Still reeling from what I saw, I called my mom, anger boiling inside me. The moment she answered, I asked bluntly, voice tight, why did you lie to Grandpa and tell him I moved the party to Brian's house? She replied with a calm, almost cold tone, what are you talking about? I never told him anything. I could feel the denial cutting deep, but I pressed on. Fine. Then why was the party at Brian's place, and no one thought to tell me? That's when she said something that felt like a knife to the chest. You should ask Brian that. Maybe ask yourself what you did so he would not invite you. And with that, she hung up. Stunned and burning with rage, I immediately called Uncle Robert, hoping someone would tell the truth. When he picked up, I demanded, why did you lie to me? He played dumb. Lie to you? About what? I didn't hold back. You're at Brian's party. So why did you tell me you were on your way to my place? There was a pause. Then, with a nervous stammer, he said, how do you know? I stayed silent. I didn't know what to say to that kind of pathetic confession. After a few seconds, like he was trying to justify his betrayal, he added something that hit harder than I ever expected. Look, you must understand, Brian's party was more important. He's working on a big investment deal. 6 months in, and it's set to bring in 200% returns. Those words were salt in an open wound. Before I could even respond, he kept going, his tone shifting into something preachy. If you want the family to respect and prioritize you, you need to be more like Brian. Think about what's good for the family. Then he hung up, leaving me in a silence that screamed. Hearing those words straight from Uncle Robert's mouth, I finally understood a harsh truth about my family. To them, the only thing that mattered was what you could give. If you brought them money, you were celebrated. If not, you were disposable, not worth their time or respect. While I was still drowning in anger and heartache after those brutal phone calls, I suddenly heard the sound of a car engine outside. I looked out the window and saw a taxi pulling up in front of the house. A familiar figure stepped out a moment later. It was my grandfather. I rushed to the door. He stood there holding a neatly wrapped gift box. His eyes were as warm as always, but I could sense the concern and sympathy behind them. The moment I saw him, all the emotions I had held throughout the night came rushing to the surface. I quickly invited him in, my voice trembling, almost breaking into tears. For the first time that day, I felt like someone truly cared. When he stepped inside and saw the beautifully decorated room, full of light but empty of people. I felt an overwhelming sense of shame. He didn't say anything. He just gently placed his hand on my shoulder, offering silent comfort. After he settled into the sofa in the living room, I told him everything. The whole story. How my parents and relatives had deliberately shut me out. How they had lied to me. How they gathered at Brian's house behind my back. I told him about the fake phone calls, the Instagram photo, and the cruel things my mom and Uncle Robert had said. He didn't interrupt once. He listened quietly and patiently, his tired eyes watching me with deep understanding, nodding occasionally like he had already known. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder and said in a soft, heavy voice, "Son, I've lived long enough to see the true nature of people. What matters is that you've learned this lesson." Hearing those words, the storm inside me started to calm strangely and unexpectedly. There was something about his voice, steady, honest, full of life's hard-earned wisdom, that felt like medicine for a broken soul. In that moment, I realized that my anger wasn't just about being betrayed. It was about the deep disappointment of facing the truth about the people I had trusted for many years. As we sat there in silence, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. My grandfather didn't judge me or try to comfort me with hollow words. He acknowledged the painful truth I had been forced to learn. And for the first time that day, I felt truly at peace. My grandfather and I returned to the dining area a little while later. Looking at all the untouched food still in their boxes, a sudden idea came to me. Instead of letting everything go to waste, why not give it to people who need it? I immediately called Marcus, a friend from college who now worked at a homeless outreach center in downtown Austin. As soon as I explained the situation, he agreed without hesitation to come pick up the food. 20 minutes later, Marcus showed up with 4 other volunteers. They helped load all the food and children's gifts into the center's van. But I didn't want to hand things off. I decided to go with them and give the gifts out myself. My grandfather insisted on joining, saying it was the perfect way to end a day like this. We went to the area under the I-35 bridge, where many homeless individuals had set up temporary shelters. Seeing the look of gratitude in their eyes as they received hot meals and gifts made something inside me settle. This right here was what Christmas was really about. Sharing and love, not the fake performances my family had put on. One elderly man named Robert, same name as my uncle, but a completely different soul, gripped my hand tightly and said, "Son, thank you. This is the best Christmas I've had in years." It was already 10 at night when we got back home. We were both exhausted, but there was a calmness in our hearts that hadn't been there before. Just as my grandfather was about to leave, he handed me the gift box he had brought earlier that evening. With a gentle, knowing smile, he said, "Go ahead, open it." Curious, I lifted the lid. Inside was a check. I had to look at it multiple times to ensure I wasn't imagining it. It was made out to Max Miller, the amount, $500,000. Completely stunned, I turned to him and asked, "Grandpa, why are you giving me this much money?" He placed a hand on my shoulder and spoke with warmth and gravity. "I never wanted to say it out loud, but I've seen everything you've gone through since you were little. The way they treated you, and more importantly, you deserve this more than anyone else in this family." Just before getting into the taxi, he looked at me with a serious expression and said, "In 3 days, 9 a.m. sharp, I want you at my house. I've got something significant to announce to the whole family." I nodded, promising I'd be there, already wondering what else my grandfather had in store. After I saw my grandfather off, I sat alone on the sofa in the living room, still bathed in the warm glow of Christmas lights. The $500,000 check was in my hands, and I stared at those numbers as if they could somehow explain why he had given me something incredibly valuable. In the quiet, my thoughts drifted to all my memories with him, the moments when he stood by me while the rest of the world seemed to turn its back. I remembered vividly when I was 12, and my parents decided to take Brian on a summer trip to Hawaii, leaving me behind with the excuse that Brian deserved it more because he was better. While Brian showed off photos from Waikiki Beach, Grandpa quietly took me to Disneyland and spent an entire week making sure I had memories just as unforgettable as my brothers, if not better. Or when I was 16 and fell in love with coding. I asked my parents if I could join a programming course, but they shot me down without a second thought. That same week, Grandpa showed up at my door with a new laptop and paid for the course in full. I'll never forget what he told me. "Don't let anyone stand in the way of your dreams." Those weekend visits to his house were always something special. We'd sit out on the porch and he would teach me the more profound lessons of life. how to understand people and stand tall for what I believe in. And he always encouraged me to keep going. His words still echo in my ears. Max, I believe you're meant to do great things. Don't let anyone make you step back. Now, sitting there in the soft golden light, my heart filled with gratitude. My family may have betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, but I still had him. The one person who truly saw, believed in, and loved me without condition. And at that moment, I knew I wasn't alone in this world. The days following the Christmas party passed in an eerie silence from my family. Not a single one of them reached out, no phone calls, no texts, no apologies. It was as if nothing had happened, like their betrayal and humiliation of me were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. 3 days after the party, I drove to my grandfather's house on Saturday morning, arriving at 9 a.m. sharp as he'd asked. To my surprise, there were already several cars parked out front. Just as I had suspected, Grandpa had called a full family meeting. When I stepped inside, the entire family was already gathered. Brian sat on the sofa with an irritated look on his face. My parents sat close together, visibly anxious. Aunts, uncles, and cousins were all present, glancing around in confusion, unsure what would unfold. Someone else was also in the room. A man in his mid-50s wearing a crisp black suit, standing next to Grandpa with a large briefcase at his feet. He looked serious and professional. The moment I walked in, Grandpa said, "This is Bennett, my attorney. Today, I have something important to share with the family." Attorney Bennett nodded politely at me, opened his case, and pulled out a thick folder. In the corner of the room, I noticed a video camera set up and recording. Once everyone was seated, Grandpa stood and looked around the room with a sternness I had never seen from him before. Then, in a clear, firm voice, he announced, "Today, I've gathered everyone to talk about the distribution of my estate." The room fell into a tense silence. A few seconds later, he continued, "Starting today, the 200-acre farm will be transferred to Max. My 15,000 shares at Heritage First National Bank will also go to Max. The main house and the rest of my assets will be passed on to Max after I'm gone." As soon as he finished, Attorney Bennett took notes and documented everything professionally, while the camera continued to record every word. My grandfather's estate was worth nearly $3 million, including the farm, this house, stock investments, and liquid assets. The moment the announcement sank in, the room erupted. Uncle Robert, my dad's younger brother, stood up and snapped, "This isn't fair, Dad." Aunt Linda, my dad's sister, chimed in angrily, "How can you be so biased? We're your children, too." Her son Luca added bitterly, "Grandpa, this is messed up." Brian shot up from the couch, his face is red with fury. "This can't be real. I'm your grandson, too." Even my father couldn't hold back. He shouted, "This is ridiculous. Why does Max get everything and the rest of us get nothing?" My mom glared at me with pure hatred in her eyes and said, "Max has done nothing for this family. Why would you give it all to him?" Amid the shouting, Grandpa calmly raised his hand, signaling everyone to be quiet. Then he said, his voice steady and full of finality, "Originally, I planned to divide everything equally among the 3 families. But 3 days ago, after seeing how all of you praised Brian and turned your backs on Max, I changed my mind." My dad exploded again. "It was just a party. That's not a good enough reason." Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and some cousins agreed, calling the decision unfair. Grandpa let out a bitter smile and said, "Didn't Brian promise you all a 200% return on some big investment? You'll all be rich soon. Max has none of that." At that point, Brian's anger turned into desperation. "Grandpa, please cancel the will. Please give me the money. I'll invest it and triple your return." Grandpa let out a loud laugh and said sharply, "I'm not stupid, kid." Then he turned to Attorney Bennett and said, "Everything's been made clear. I have nothing more to say." Bennett nodded and confirmed that everything, the will, the transfers, the legal documentation, would be finalized within 1 week. The entire family stood and left in a storm of resentment. No one accepted Grandpa's decision. Before leaving, my parents, along with Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, hurled one last threat. "If that's how you want to treat us, then don't expect any of us to be around when you need help." Without flinching, Grandpa replied, "I still have $1 million in personal funds. That's more than enough to pay for private care and medical services. I won't need anything from any of you." And with that, they all left in bitter silence, leaving just Grandpa and me in a quiet house. The house fell into a heavy silence after the door closed and the last car engine faded into the distance. It was just Grandpa and me, sitting across from each other in the living room. I sat quietly, trying to process everything that had just happened. A $3 million estate, the 200-acre farm, the bank shares now belonged to me. It was a life-altering moment I never could have imagined. Finally, I broke the silence. Grandpa, I don't know what to say. Thank you so much. Then I asked the question that had been in my mind all morning. Can I ask you something? What was the real reason you decided to leave everything to me? I know it wasn't just because of the Christmas party. He looked at me and smiled gently, his eyes warm and full of affection. He didn't launch into a long explanation or list the years of things he'd witnessed or the countless moments I thought had gone unnoticed. He said, because you deserve it. That short answer held everything. All the love, trust, and pride he'd carried for me through the years. In the days following the reading of the will, my life quickly spiraled into chaos as my relatives began showing up one by one, each with a desperate plea. Aunt Linda was the first to appear at my doorstep. When I opened the door, she stood there with red, puffy eyes and said in a pleading voice, Max, I need your help. I need $25,000 for my husband's heart surgery. It's urgent. He needs it to survive. A few days later, Uncle Robert came by. Sitting in my living room, he looked at me with a serious expression and said, Max, I'm hoping you can help with $10,000 for Caleb's next college semester. Then came the cousins, one after another. One needed money to fix a leaking roof. Another said their car had broken down and they needed help buying a new one. Each story came with what seemed like a legitimate and pressing need. But the most shocking part wasn't their sudden interest in me. It was a complete shift in attitude from my parents. Out of nowhere, my mom started calling me every day, asking how I was doing, checking on my health, and talking to me in a sweet, gentle tone I had never heard from her before. My dad kept inviting me over for dinner, saying things like, we're still family. We need to reconnect, put all these misunderstandings behind us. But beneath every word, I could sense the real motive. A slow, careful attempt to convince me to share the inheritance. Or better yet, give it back altogether. I stood firm. To each request, I said no, calmly, clearly, and without hesitation. Because after everything, I had finally learned how to say no to the people who had hurt me. Unable to endure the constant intrusion from my relatives any longer, I made a firm decision 3 months ago. I sold my house and moved to a place where none of them could find me. I sold my old home for $380,000. With that money, combined with what Grandpa had given me, I could purchase a high-end condo worth $710,000 in East Austin, one of the most secure areas in the city. My new place sits on the 15th floor, featuring 2 spacious bedrooms and a breathtaking view of the Colorado River. Most importantly, the building has state-of-the-art security. Keycard access, on-site guards, and surveillance cameras covering every corner. No one gets in without my permission. To entirely cut ties, I changed my phone number, updated my email, and deleted all my social media accounts. I didn't want a single thread connecting me to the chaos I had left behind. When I received the keys, I invited Grandpa to see the place. He spent nearly an hour walking through the rooms, admiring the open living space and stepping onto the balcony to take in the view. As we stood there, overlooking the city in the soft afternoon light, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said with pride, "You did well. I'm glad you took the step to walk away from them." Hearing those words, I knew I had made the right choice. And for the first time, I felt like I had a truly mine space. A home where I could live in peace, free from the people I once called family. After I made the changes to my living situation and cut off all communication, the harassment from my relatives finally stopped. Life became peaceful. I could fully focus on work and enjoy the private space I had built for myself. But that peace was shattered a month ago. It was a regular afternoon at the office when the receptionist called and told me a group of people was waiting for me in the lobby. When I went downstairs, I saw Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and their son and daughter standing there, looking anxious and visibly upset. I did not want to cause a scene at work, so I agreed to meet them at the Starbucks next to the building. As soon as we sat down, Aunt Linda launched into a rant, her voice sharp with anger and desperation. Brian had convinced them to invest in a new cryptocurrency called Family Coin, promising massive returns of up to 300% in 6 months. Brian had introduced himself as the official advisor for the project, using the family name and exaggerated stories of past success, many of which had been inflated by our parents to gain their trust. His influence was so strong that 4 branches of the extended family, including Aunt Linda's and Uncle Robert's, ended up pouring in a combined total of $1.6 million. Uncle Robert explained that 2 months into the investment, the Family Coin website disappeared. Brian stopped responding to calls, deleted all his social media accounts, and even moved out of the apartment where they knew he lived. But what shocked me most wasn't the scam. It was their demand. Instead of trying to contact Brian or going to the police, they came to me, demanding that I repay the money on his behalf with the excuse, "You're Brian's brother. That makes you responsible for what he did." Hearing that, I was torn between rage and disbelief at its absurdity. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and looked at them with a cold, steady voice. "Let me clarify, if you come to me again about this, I'll take you to court. I have nothing to do with what Brian did." Immediately, they shifted tactics. Uncle Robert said, "Didn't Grandpa give you over $3 million? You should be splitting that up." Aunt Linda jumped in, "Please, Max, we're about to lose our house to the bank." They kept pushing, trying to guilt me, beg, and reason, but none of it worked. I turned around and walked straight out of Starbucks without looking back. At that moment, I knew cutting ties with the family was the right decision. 2 days after that meeting at the coffee shop, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I immediately recognized the voice I'd been trying to avoid for months. "Max, it's your mother," she said. Her voice sounded more tired and anxious than usual. Without any greeting or small talk, she jumped straight to the point. "I need you to help with $300,000 to cover the mortgage. The bank is about to seize the house." When I asked for details, she reluctantly admitted the painful truth. She and my father had taken out a mortgage on their house, $300,000 in cash, and handed all of it to Brian to invest in the Family Coin project. They were on the verge of losing their home with no way to pay it back. After hearing everything, I let out a cold laugh and replied, "I'll make you an offer. I'm willing to buy the house for $500,000. If you agree, sell it to me, but I'm not handing over 300 grand to bail you out." Hearing that, my mother snapped, "You ungrateful brat. I gave birth to you." I stayed calm and responded, "That's true, but that doesn't mean I'm responsible for cleaning up your mistakes." I drove to Grandpa's house to tell him about the evening call. He listened without surprise and then told me something that made everything clearer. The rest of the family had also gone to him, trying to pressure him into changing their will and demanding that he help them out of their financial mess. But Grandpa had stood his ground. He told them he wouldn't change a word, and when they wouldn't leave, he calmly called the police and had them removed. A week after the first call, my phone rang again. Same number my parents had been using. My father's voice sounded more composed this time, like he had considered my offer. As soon as I picked up, he spoke in a calm, rehearsed tone. "Max, your mother and I agree to sell the house to you for $500,000, just like you said." But almost immediately, he added a condition. "However, we want to keep living in the house. We've been here for years, we can't just leave." I couldn't help but feel amused by how calculated it all was. They wanted the money to pay off the bank, yet also expected to keep the house, a deal that benefited them entirely. After a brief pause, I responded calmly, "My current offer is $450,000. You want to stay? Fine, $3,000 a month in rent." That number struck a nerve. My father lost his temper and yelled, "Last week, you said 500. Why are you changing it now?" I let out a small laugh and replied with quiet confidence, "This is business, Dad. You missed your chance last week. And let me be clear, if you call me a third time about this, the offer drops to 400 flat." He hung up immediately, likely boiling with anger. I sat back, knowing the next call would come, and soon. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, his voice was different, softer, less sure. In a pleading tone, he said, "Max, your mother and I want to renegotiate. For $170,000, would you take it?" Then he added, "We'll move out once the paperwork is done. We can't afford 3 grand in rent." That offer told me everything I needed to know. I was getting the house at a fair price, and I wouldn't have to deal with them living there or causing problems. Without hesitation, I answered, "Deal. I accept." And just like that, after all those years of being mistreated, I finally learned how to stand my ground, negotiate, and protect what was mine. Transferring the house from my parents to my name is still underway. My attorney is handling all the legal paperwork, and everything is expected to be finalized within the next 2 weeks. My parents have already begun packing, preparing to move into a smaller apartment they can afford. As for Brian, he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. After losing all the money in the family coin scam, Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert reported him to the police. He was arrested 2 weeks ago and is awaiting trial on financial fraud charges. Ironically, they also came to me, asking if I would buy their house to help them out of their situation. Needless to say, I declined. We devised something meaningful regarding the 200-acre ranch my grandfather transferred to me. We're leasing the land, and with the income, Grandpa and I decided to establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. It's our way of creating something truly positive for the community. Even though my life has changed completely, I still keep my weekend routine visiting Grandpa. Those quiet afternoons on his porch, sipping coffee and talking about life, have become the most treasured part of my week. He's still healthy, sharp-minded, and most importantly, he supports every decision I've made. Looking back on this journey, I don't regret a choice. It was right to cut ties with my family, move homes, and stand firm against their unreasonable demands. I feel respected and in complete control of my future for the first time. If there's one piece of advice I can give anyone listening to this story, it's this. Don't let family ties close your eyes to reality. The people who genuinely love you will never deliberately hurt or take advantage of your kindness. Your assets, your time, energy, and money result from your hard work. Protect them from those who only take and never give. Some people may think I was too harsh or selfish for how I treated my family. But what do you think? Was I being greedy? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below this story. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it. Also, let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know how far this story has reached. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. What would you do if your brother used a baseball bat to beat your 14-year-old son? On my 40th birthday, my brother broke my son's 2 ribs with a baseball bat, just because I refused to let his son borrow a bike. You might think my son was being selfish, but that's not how it was. My kid had good reasons to say no. And me? Seeing my child that I'd raised for 14 years lying there clutching himself on the grass. I couldn't hold back anymore. Let's follow the story. I'm gonna tell you what went down inside this family drama. Hello everyone, I'm Blake, 43, living in Billings, Montana. I live with my wife Erica, the strongest woman I've ever met. We've got 2 amazing kids. Our oldest son, Lucas, is 17, a senior in high school right now, and our daughter, Mia, is 15, a girl whose eyes always look at the world with curiosity. Yesterday, in the hospital's suffocating air, I visited Mike, my best friend since college. The moment I opened the room door, my eyes caught sight of his beaten-up face. One eye swollen shut, his upper lip split open, and purple bruises spreading all over his arms. The second he saw me walk in, Mike slowly sat up and gave me a weak smile, saying, "I look pretty terrible, don't I? But it was worth it, Blake." As I looked at the injuries covering Mike's body, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. Not out of pity, but because I knew that feeling all too well. Mike was in the hospital because of a family conflict. A relative had insulted his 16-year-old daughter, and without hesitating for a second, Mike had jumped into a fight with that guy. The result was both of them ending up in the hospital. Driving home from the hospital, memories from 3 years ago came flooding back to me. Also, I stood up against my own family while protecting my child. But unlike Mike, the price I had to pay was way more painful. It was the complete breakdown with my own flesh and blood, and the wounds my son had to bear. And today, I've decided to tell the whole story. This is not just to let out the still lingering emotions, but because the story of fathers like Mike and me, who are ready to fight the whole world to protect their children, can give strength to anyone facing similar situations. Sometimes, to protect the people you love most, you have to be willing to lose the people you once thought would always stand by your side. The story I'm telling today happened on my 40th birthday, a day at the end of June 2022. For many people, turning 40 marks an important milestone in life, when you look back at the road you've traveled and start looking forward with a different perspective. It was the same for me, but not in the way I'd ever imagined. First, I did not intend to throw a birthday party. 40 years old, to me, was just a regular number. I'd have a simple dinner with Erica and the 2 kids, maybe at our favorite restaurant downtown, Billings, then go home and watch a movie together. Simple, cozy, and nothing complicated. But then Erica started in. One evening in May, When we were sitting on the back porch after dinner, Erica gently put her hand on my shoulder and said that a 40th birthday was a special occasion, and I deserved to have a meaningful gathering. Honestly, I turned her down, not because I dislike parties, but because I've always felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. But then Erica found allies, our 2 kids. I still remember that Sunday morning when Lucas and Mia entered my office. Lucas was holding a homemade birthday card with the message, "Happy birthday to the most amazing father in the world. Let us throw a party worthy of you." Meanwhile, Mia stood beside him, her big, round eyes looking at me full of hope, saying she'd already planned out the desserts I liked most. And I couldn't say no after my kids made that request. Gradually, the plan for the party took shape. We decided to host it at home, in the backyard where I'd spent months building the barbecue area and arranging the cedar chairs I'd made myself. Erica guests and organized the menu, while Lucas and Mia excitedly planned the decorations. The guest list wasn't too long. Besides my parents, George and Barbara, there were Erica's parents, though they'd already told us they couldn't make it since they were on a European trip. I also invited my brother Andrew, his wife Christina, and their son Jason, who was 15 then. There was also Uncle Kevin, my dad's brother, and my 2 cousins Justin and Brandon with their wives and kids. A few close colleagues and old friends were added to the list too. All the preparations went smoothly. We spent the whole week cleaning the house, decorating the yard with twinkling string lights, and preparing food. Lucas even made a big sign by hand that said 40 years of excellence to hang at the entrance gate. Mia was busy making colorful paper flowers to decorate the tables. The day before my birthday, when all the prep work was done, I stood alone in the backyard, looking at the space that had been decorated. In the Montana sunset, with the distant mountain ranges reflecting the orange-red light of the sun, I felt a peaceful happiness. I imagined the next day, when this place would be filled with laughter, the lively chatter of loved ones. I still believed I was going to have a party full of joy and happiness with my family. How could I know that in just 24 more hours, that party would turn into a nightmare and would forever end the relationship between me and the people I used to call parents, my brother? The birthday party started at 5 in the evening, and the first guests arrived. Uncle Kevin and my 2 cousins, Justin and Brandon, with their families. Even though my in-laws couldn't attend because they were on their trip to Europe, they still sent me a fossil watch with a card full of warm wishes. When my parents arrived, my mom quickly took over the kitchen with Erica. At the same time, my dad stood outside by the barbecue area with Uncle Kevin, occasionally offering unsolicited advice about how to grill meat the right way. Just as I opened a beer, Andrew, his wife Christina, and son Jason walked through the gate. After shaking hands with Andrew, I forced a smile and invited him into the party area. Meanwhile, Jason quickly found Lucas and Mia, and the kids gathered around the ping-pong table I'd set up for the party. The space was filled with lively conversations and laughter echoing around. Lucas and the other kids were playing ping-pong with excited cheering. Mia was busy showing everyone the paper flowers she'd made herself. From the corner of the yard, I could see Erica laughing and talking with some friends, her eyes occasionally glancing my way, full of pride. Before the formal dinner began, Uncle Kevin lightly tapped his wine glass to get everyone's attention, then raised his glass high and said warmly, "Congratulations, Blake, my nephew. 40 years have passed, and I still remember like it was yesterday the first time I held you. Today, seeing you with this happy family, I couldn't be more proud. Come on, everyone, raise your glasses." Everyone raised their glasses in unison. "Congratulations, Blake," echoed throughout the yard. I felt a warm wave of emotion rise as I looked around at the familiar faces, people who had walked alongside me through many stages of life. Even Andrew, my brother, with whom I had a not-so-smooth relationship, smiled and nodded at me from across the yard. When soft music started playing from the sound system that Lucas had carefully set up, dinner began with fragrant grilled meat, fresh salads, and the desserts Mia had spent the whole week preparing. Watching everyone laughing and chatting happily with drinks in hand, I felt happiness spreading through me. At that moment, I thought this would be a perfect birthday memory, a day I'd remember forever with beautiful memories. Too bad fate had other plans. Around 6 in the evening, the party was going on in a cheerful atmosphere. I stood near the buffet table, chatting with Mark, my buddy from college, about a new construction project our company had just landed. We clinked glasses and laughed loudly about an old story from our student days. Suddenly, a panicked scream tore through the peaceful atmosphere. "Andrew, stop right now." The scream came from the end of the yard, near where the kids' bikes and toys were kept. My conversation with Mark cut off immediately. I looked toward the commotion, and the scene before my eyes was like a nightmare. My brother Andrew was standing with a baseball bat gripped firmly in his hand. His face was red with rage, his eyes bulging, and the corner of his mouth twisted in a cold, harsh smile. My two cousins, Justin and Brandon, were trying to grab his arms, holding tight to stop him, but Andrew was still struggling, trying to break free from their restraint. In that moment, looking into Andrew's eyes, I no longer recognized the brother I'd grown up with. Instead, there was a strange look, a primitive bloodlust I'd never seen in him. He looked like a beast in a fit of rage. Right after recognizing the situation, my eyes dropped, and I was stunned to see Lucas, my son, lying on the grass. The boy was curled up, arms clutching one side of his ribs, face twisted in pain. Without thinking anymore, I immediately put my drink on the table and dashed toward them. In those brief seconds, everything seemed to slow down in my mind. The music was still playing from the speakers, conversations were still buzzing, but the world seemed completely silent for me. Only the sound of my heart pounding in my chest remained. Just as I ran over, Erica also appeared from the kitchen, her face pale when she saw our son on the ground. Without anyone having to say anything, looking at the scene before me, I immediately understood Andrew had used the baseball bat to hit my child. Rage surged up in me like lava erupting, blazing hot and uncontrollable. Without a moment's hesitation, without any restraint, while Justin and Brandon were still trying to hold Andrew tight, I lunged forward, yanked the baseball bat from his hands. My entire body shook with anger, and without thinking, I swung the bat hard, aimed straight at Andrew's head. Luckily, Andrew managed to dodge the blow to his head. However, the bat still hit his shoulder hard. A loud crack rang out, and the sound of Andrew's shoulder bone breaking. The sound made everyone around fall silent. Following that horrific impact was Andrew screaming in pain, a long and miserable howl like that of a wounded animal. He fell, one hand clutching his shoulder, face contorted in agony. The rage in me hadn't subsided. I continued moving forward, the bat still gripped tightly in my hand, ready for another blow. But right then, a force from behind held me tight. Kevin, my uncle, was using all his strength to pull me back. Right then, with a voice hoarse with fear, Uncle Kevin yelled in my ear, "Stop it, Blake. You hit him again. There's going to be murder." After what my uncle said, I suddenly realized what I was doing. The bat fell from my hands, hitting the grass. My breathing was still heavy, but the anger gave way to confusion and worry. Right then, Christina, Andrew's wife, came running from inside the house. She rushed straight to where her husband was lying, kneeling beside him with a panicked look. Unable to control herself, Christina screamed tremblingly, "Oh my God! Andrew, what happened?" While stunned, Jason, Andrew, and Christina's 15-year-old son appeared from somewhere and quietly walked over to his mother. With a cold voice, showing no emotion, he told Christina, "Blake attacked Dad with a baseball bat." Hearing her son say that, Christina seemed to snap out of shock. She jumped up, face red with anger, and rushed straight at me. Before I could react, Christina had pushed hard into my chest, almost making me lose my balance. Her eyes looked like they wanted to burn me as she yelled loudly, "Blake, why did you hit my husband? I won't let this go." Fortunately, Uncle Kevin quickly stepped between us this time, creating a safety barrier to prevent the argument from escalating into violence. But my real tragedy was beginning. From the crowd of guests standing silently witnessing, my father, George, stepped out. He walked straight toward me with heavy steps and cold eyes I'd never seen before. Without warning, without a question, he raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. A slap strong enough to make my head turn to one side. While I was still dazed from the slap, my father looked straight into my eyes and said through gritted teeth, "Why did you dare hit Andrew?" Right after that, my mother also appeared beside Dad, her face flushed with shame and anger. She looked at me, eyes full of disappointment, and said with a steely voice, "How shameful that you would hit your own brother." In the middle of my own birthday party, with my father's slap still stinging on my cheek, and words of condemnation from my mother's mouth, I felt like the world around me was collapsing. My body went cold, not from fear, but from an absolute emptiness spreading from my heart throughout my entire body. I asked myself how they could. How could my parents stand there, in front of everyone, and condemn me without asking anything about my son? How could they defend someone who had used a baseball bat to attack a 14-year-old child? How could they turn their backs on their flesh and blood like that? In that moment, a deep, indescribable pain spread through me. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, but the shattering of trust, the collapse of everything I thought was solid, the love and protection a family gives each other. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging deep into my palms until they bled, but I didn't feel pain. All I could feel was rage surging like a tsunami, mixed with pain and disbelief. That anger wasn't just for Andrew, the one who had attacked my son, but also for my own parents, the people I thought would always stand by me, protect me, and my little family. But no, they had chosen sides, and it wasn't my side. It wasn't the side of their grandson lying in pain on the grass. After everything that happened, I realized that the family I had always trusted and considered a safe place no longer existed. What remained was just an empty shell of what once was, an illusion of family bonds I had been deluding myself about for so long. That feeling of betrayal cut into my heart like a sharp blade, leaving a wound I knew would never fully heal. After my father's slap and my mother's defending words, the rage inside me flared up. The entire yard sank into a heavy atmosphere, all eyes focused on us. The birthday party had turned into an unimaginable chaos. Unable to hold back anymore, I yelled into my parents' faces. "Andrew hit my child. Don't you see my son got beaten by Andrew?" My scream made everyone jump. Suddenly, all other sounds disappeared, leaving only my heavy breathing and Lucas's painful groaning. After my yell, my parents seemed to wake up. They stood there, confused, their eyes finally glancing toward Lucas lying on the ground. In that moment of silence, Justin stepped forward, stood straight with a serious expression, and said clearly, "Andrew hit Lucas first. Brandon and I witnessed the whole thing." Brandon nodded in confirmation, his eyes full of anger as he looked toward Andrew lying there, clutching his shoulder, and added, "That's right. Andrew attacked Lucas with a baseball bat for absolutely no reason." My parents and Christina's eyes were now full of amazement. They stood there, mouths agape, as if they couldn't believe what they'd heard. After about 2 seconds of silence, my father shook his head slightly, his voice so low I had to strain to hear. "That can't be possible." My mother, always the one to control situations, turned to look at Lucas lying on the grass. Her face was tense, but her voice softened when she spoke. "Lucas, tell Grandma what happened?" At this point, Lucas tried to sit up with help from Erica and Mia. The boy's face was twisted in pain, but his eyes still looked straight at his grandmother when he replied with a trembling voice. "I was just standing there when Uncle Andrew came over with a baseball bat. He didn't say anything. Looking at him, I got really scared, quickly turned around to run away, and then he swung the bat and hit me." While Lucas was talking, Erica had knelt beside her son. Without saying a word, she gently pulled Lucas's shirt up. What appeared made everyone gasp in shock. A large purple bruise was forming on Lucas's back, running across his right ribs. The surrounding skin was red and starting to swell, with an unmistakable mark in the shape of a baseball bat. Looking at the wound on my child's back, I felt a chill run down my spine. That wasn't a light or accidental hit. That was a hard, deliberate blow aimed at a 14-year-old child. Without hesitating for a second, I turned to my wife and said with a hoarse voice, "Erica, call 911 to report this. Request police and an ambulance." Erica nodded decisively and immediately pulled her phone from her pocket. But just as I finished speaking, my mother screamed in panic, "Wait, don't call the police until we clear this up." My father quickly moved closer, nodding in support of his wife, and said sternly, "That's right. Our family will be very embarrassed if the police come." Standing in the middle of this chaos, with my injured son and my brother lying there groaning, my parents' words made me unable to believe my ears. They were worried about their face while their grandson needed medical attention. Erica, always calm in every situation, looked straight into my parents' eyes and said firmly, "My son has been attacked and needs immediate medical care. I'm calling 911. Having said that, despite the opposing looks from my parents, Erica stepped aside and started making the call. While Erica was on the phone, Christina was still kneeling beside Andrew, her eyes full of confusion. Jason stood nearby, his face cold, showing no emotion, even though he'd witnessed his father attacking a child for no reason. The space sank into a strange silence, only Erica's voice talking to the 911 operator and Andrew's groaning. The guests stood around with stunned faces, no one knowing what to do or say. As soon as Erica finished the call, she returned to me and Lucas, nodded slightly in confirmation, and said, They're on their way. Ambulance and police will be here in 15 to 20 minutes. My father stood still. His face hardened in a strange anger. He looked at me, his eyes no longer showing affection, and said, "You didn't need to do that. We could have handled this within the family." Hearing my father's words, a strange feeling surged in me. Not anger anymore, but deep disappointment. I looked straight into my father's eyes, my voice dropping low. This isn't a family matter anymore when an adult attacks a child with a baseball bat. This is a crime, and I'll make sure justice is served. Afterward, I turned my back on my parents and knelt beside Lucas. Putting my hand on my son's shoulder, I said softly, "Dad's here now, son. Everything's gonna be okay." Lucas looked at me, the boy's eyes welling up with tears, not from physical pain but from the pain of witnessing the family fall apart right before his eyes. He nodded slightly, and in that moment, I knew our lives would never be the same again. While waiting for the police to arrive, the atmosphere in the yard grew tense. Lucas was still lying on the grass, with Erica and Mia beside him, caring for him. Andrew sat on a chair, Christina checking his shoulder, while Jason stood nearby with an indifferent expression. Uncle Kevin, always the calm and fair in the family, walked closer to Andrew. Looking straight at my brother's face, Uncle Kevin said, "Andrew, why did you hit Blake's son?" Andrew looked up, his eyes still flashing with anger, but his voice had become strangely calm when he answered, "I was helping my brother teach his kid a lesson." That answer shocked everyone around. Kevin frowned, unable to hide the disbelief on his face. He slowly asked again, "Can you be more specific?" Andrew sat up straight, even though this made him wince in pain, then said with incomprehensible confidence, "Lucas is too selfish. He doesn't know how to share within the family. I was teaching him that, but he wouldn't listen, even talked back very stubbornly." Right when those words ended, Lucas suddenly struggled up, though still in pain. The boy pointed straight at Andrew's face and yelled tremblingly, "You're lying. You hit me because I refused to let your kid borrow my new bike." The entire yard sank into silence after Lucas's words. Andrew opened his mouth to argue back, but Kevin quickly raised his hand to stop him. Turning to Lucas, he gently asked, "Can you tell the whole story, Lucas?" Right after that request, Lucas took a deep breath, trying to control the pain, then began recounting everything in a broken voice. According to what Lucas told us, when Jason had just arrived at the party about 10 minutes earlier, he had taken Lucas's new bike without permission and had gone for a test ride. That bike was a gift I'd bought for Lucas over a month before my birthday party. Lucas disagreed and took the bike back, then brought it inside to store in the shed. There had been a light argument between Lucas and Jason, but they never raised their voices at each other. About 2 minutes later, Jason left, and less than a minute after that, Jason returned with Andrew. Andrew demanded that Lucas let Jason borrow the bike to experience it, but Lucas refused because the motorcycle was Lucas's property. At that point, Andrew had threatened Lucas with the words, "If you don't listen to me, I'm gonna hit you." After that threat, Lucas didn't want to argue, so he stayed silent and turned his back to walk away. In the next 3 minutes, Andrew went to his car, returned with a baseball bat, and swung it at my son. Hearing what Lucas recounted, all eyes focused on Andrew, who still showed no remorse. Instead, he looked at Lucas with contemptuous eyes. What horrified me most was my parents' reaction. Instead of apologizing for Lucas's injury, they immediately defended Andrew. My father stepped forward, his voice firm when he told Lucas, "You should know how to share with your cousins in the family. Andrew might have gone a bit overboard, but you need a lesson about how to behave in the family." My mother nodded in agreement, her eyes directed toward Lucas, and said reproachfully, "In the family, we have to know how to share with each other. Jason just wanted to borrow the bike for a little bit. What's the big deal you had to refuse?" I couldn't believe my ears hearing what they said. Blood rushed to my head. I stepped in front of my parents and yelled with all my indignation, "What are you saying? The bike is Lucas's, and he has the right to refuse to let others touch his stuff." Without any wavering, my parents continued defending Andrew. My father shook his head, looked at me disappointedly, and said through gritted teeth, "Blake, you've raised Lucas to be selfish. He needs to learn how to share and respect adults." My mother added, "Andrew did the right thing. You should be grateful to Andrew. You're spoiling Lucas with your way of raising him." But what shocked me most was when Christina suddenly spoke up, her voice full of calculation. "Blake, you have to take responsibility for Andrew's injury. You have to cover his medical bills and compensate him. His shoulder is pretty badly injured." Hearing that, I felt like someone had just slapped me in the face again. I turned sharply to Christina, eyes bulging when I asked back, "What about my son then?" Andrew hit a 14-year-old child. The space went silent until Uncle Kevin, who had been silently watching the argument, stepped up and said with a decisive voice, "Blake is right. Even though Blake attacked Andrew, the act of hitting a 14-year-old child is unacceptable, for any reason whatsoever." A few relatives standing nearby nodded in agreement. It seemed like reason was finally winning. But my parents didn't think so. My father turned around, his eyes cold when he told Kevin, "Kevin, don't interfere in my family business." After my father said that, Uncle Kevin could only shake his head helplessly. Immediately, I walked over to my parents, stood straight, and looked directly into their eyes. At that moment, I realized I no longer recognized the two people before me. They were no longer the parents I once knew. With a voice trembling from rage, I gritted out each word. "You are evil scumbags. From now on, we're done. I no longer have a father and mother. My son no longer has grandparents." After my declaration, my parents stood there, mouths agape in shock. They were about to say something more, but I raised my hand to stop them and turned my back to walk toward my son to check his wounds. When I turned my back on my parents, I felt a strange sensation, a mixture of pain, liberation, and determination. I had just cut ties with my parents, the people who had raised me, and I didn't feel any regret at all. Because when they chose to side with the one who attacked my son, they were no longer my family. 20 minutes after Erica's emergency call, 2 police cars and an ambulance stopped in front of my house gate. 4 medical personnel came in, and they quickly split into 2 groups. One group went to Lucas, the other checked on Andrew. Following them were 4 police officers, their faces serious and alert. A female police officer approached me. She looked around the scene with professional eyes, then said calmly, "I'm the officer in charge of this case. Can you tell me what happened here?" Before I could answer, my father had stepped forward, and his voice rushed when he said to the female officer, "This is just a small family misunderstanding. There's no need to make such a big deal." The female officer politely but firmly replied, "Sir, we received a report about an assault involving a weapon and a minor victim. This is our standard procedure." Then she turned back to me, waiting for an answer. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions as I recounted what had happened. While I explained everything, the medical personnel had finished their initial examination of Andrew and Lucas. A male medic walked over to the police, his face serious as he reported, "Both victims need to be taken to the hospital for more thorough examination. The teenager possibly has broken ribs, and the other man shows signs of a broken shoulder." The female officer nodded and said, "Take them right away. We'll send someone to monitor at the hospital." Andrew and Lucas were quickly put on stretchers and moved into the ambulance. Erica immediately stepped forward, gripping Mia's hand tightly, and said, "Mia and I will go with Lucas. You stay here and deal with the police." I nodded, gently squeezing my wife's hand before she got into the ambulance with our daughter and Lucas. I saw Christina and Jason getting into the vehicle with Andrew from afar. Christina's face was still full of anger as she glanced toward me. When the ambulance left, the atmosphere in the yard became heavier. Only my parents, Uncle Kevin, Justin, and Brandon, along with a few close friends, stood in tense silence with the police officers. The female officer opened her notepad and started writing as she said, "Now I need to take statements from everyone who witnessed the incident. Who was the first to see what happened?" Uncle Kevin stepped forward, calm but determined. "I'm Kevin. I witnessed most of the incident, and am willing to provide my statement." Right after that, Justin and Brandon also stepped up. Brandon said confidently, "We directly witnessed Andrew attacking Lucas with a baseball bat, and then Blake's reaction." The female officer nodded, then pointed to a male officer and said, "My colleague will record your statements. Please follow him." As they followed the male officer to a quiet corner of the yard, the female officer turned to me seriously and asked, "Are there any security cameras that recorded the incident?" I nodded, feeling relieved when I remembered this. I replied, "If you need it, I'll provide it right away." The female officer seemed satisfied with this information, responding, "Excellent. Can you provide the footage to us?" Immediately, I extracted the relevant video and sent it to the police department's email address, which she provided. After providing all the requirements, I noticed my parents talked earnestly with another male officer. My mother was saying with a trembling voice, "It was just kids arguing." Then adults got a little heated too. This will cause unnecessary damage to our family's reputation if it becomes public. The male officer listened to them finish, then replied professionally, "Sir and Madam, I understand your concerns. However, when an assault involves a weapon and a minor victim, we have a legal obligation to investigate and report. Child Protective Services will also be notified as required by law." My father looked disappointed, but my mother nearly collapsed. She plopped down into a nearby chair, her face pale as she said, "Oh my God, everyone in town is going to talk about this." While the police continued their work, I stood alone, feeling exhausted both physically and mentally. My 40th birthday party had turned into a disaster. Still, what hurt me most wasn't the violence or the police presence, but the way my parents had chosen to protect the family's reputation over my child's safety. Looking at them now, I no longer recognized the people I used to call my parents. They had become strangers, people willing to overlook an assault just to avoid losing face in the community. When the police finished collecting statements and evidence, the female officer approached me and said, "Mr. Blake, thank you for your cooperation. We'll continue investigating this case. You should go to the hospital with your family. One of our colleagues is already there." I nodded, thanked her, and prepared to go to the hospital. As I was getting ready to leave, Uncle Kevin approached me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said quietly, "Blake, you did the right thing protecting Lucas. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." With a grateful nod to Uncle Kevin, I got in my car and drove away, leaving behind a shattered birthday party and family relationships that had changed forever. During the entire drive to the hospital, my mind kept flashing images of my son lying on the grass with the wound on his back, and the feeling of guilt kept rising. I had organized that party and invited Andrew, and my son had to bear the consequences. When I arrived, I hurried into the emergency room. Erica was sitting in the waiting area, Mia asleep on her lap. My wife's face was exhausted, but her eyes softened when she saw me. As soon as she saw me, Erica gently and worriedly said, "The doctor just finished the examination. Lucas has 2 broken ribs and a pretty deep bruise. They're doing some additional tests to make sure there's no internal damage." Before I could ask more, a young doctor stepped out from the examination room. He looked at me and asked, "You're the boy's father, right? We just completed the examination process. The broken ribs will need time to heal, but fortunately there's no organ damage. Your family can go in to visit your son." Immediately, Erica and I followed the doctor into the examination room, where Lucas was lying on the bed, his upper body carefully bandaged. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw us. As soon as he saw me, my son spoke first with a weak voice. "Dad, I'm sorry for ruining your birthday." Hearing those words, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. I walked to the bedside, gently stroked my son's head, and replied with an emotional voice, "I should be the one apologizing. If I hadn't thrown the party, this wouldn't have happened." Looking deep into my child's eyes, I continued, "I'm proud that you knew how to stand up and protect your property. That was the right thing to do." I heard what I said, and Lucas smiled weakly, but I could see the worry still in his eyes. Lucas asked quietly, "What about Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Andrew? What's going to happen to our family now, Dad?" That question put me in a difficult position. How could I tell my son that our family relationships had shattered beyond repair? But looking into Lucas's clear, trusting eyes, I knew I had to tell the truth. My son deserved to know, no matter how painful it was. About 30 minutes after I arrived at the hospital, while I was still sitting beside Lucas's bed, trying to explain the family situation as gently as possible, a soft knock on the door rang out. Erica, who was sitting beside Mia in the corner of the room, stood up and opened the door. The female police officer I'd met at home walked in, followed by a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and a kind but serious face. The woman wore a white shirt, black pants, and an employee badge that read Montana Child Protective Services. The female officer nodded hello to me, then introduced, "This is Ms. Diane Carter from CPS. She needs to talk to Lucas to assess the situation." The CPS worker approached the bed, smiling warmly at Lucas. She pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, keeping an appropriate distance so Lucas wouldn't feel pressured. Lucas looked at me as if seeking reassurance. I nodded encouragingly, and the boy began recounting the entire story from the beginning, about Jason taking his bike without permission, how he refused to let him borrow it, and then Andrew appearing with the baseball bat. Throughout the telling, Diane nodded and listened, occasionally asking questions to clarify some details, but mainly letting Lucas speak for himself. She took careful notes in her notebook, her eyes showing genuine concern. When Lucas finished the story, Diane paused momentarily, contemplating what she'd just heard. Then, with a professional but understanding tone, she gently asked, "Why didn't you let Jason borrow your bike?" That question seemed simple, but I knew this was essential to CPS's assessment. They needed to know if there was any reasonable justification for Lucas's decision. Despite being in pain, Lucas didn't hesitate when he replied, "Jason has broken my stuff twice before. First time was my gaming controller, and the second time was my skateboard. Jason never apologized for those things." Diane nodded, writing down the answer. She continued asking a few more questions, mainly about the relationship between Lucas and Jason before this, and how Andrew usually dealt with Lucas during previous family gatherings. After about 30 minutes of talking with Lucas, Diane turned to Erica and me, asking us to provide more information about the family background and relationships between members. We honestly shared about the underlying tensions that had existed for a long time, although no one could have imagined they would escalate into violence like this. A strange sense of relief washed over me when the door closed behind Diane and the female officer, even though the family situation had shattered beyond repair. At least now, people were standing up to protect my son, ensuring that justice would be served. After a week in the hospital, Lucas was finally discharged. My son's wounds were gradually healing, although the broken ribs still needed more time to heal completely. Our family atmosphere began returning to normal the morning after Lucas came home. Erica prepared a special breakfast with pancakes and maple syrup, Lucas's favorite. Mia excitedly told Lucas about what had happened at her school. I sat there, looking at my kids, and felt profound gratitude that our little family was still intact, even though relationships with the rest of the family had shattered. The doorbell rang around 10 in the morning, while Lucas was resting on the sofa and I was working with some documents in the living room. In the kitchen, Erica looked out the window and immediately froze. Erica turned to me, her voice tense as she said, "Andrew's standing at the door." Anger immediately surged in me. How dare he show up here after what had happened? I put the documents down and walked to the door, signaling Erica to take Lucas and Mia into the back room. When I opened the door, Andrew's image hit my eyes. One arm was in a sling, his right shoulder heavily bandaged. Even so, there wasn't a trace of remorse in his eyes, only that familiar cold calculating look. I stood blocking the door, didn't invite him in, and asked coldly, "What are you doing here?" Andrew looked over my shoulder, as if trying to find Lucas, then roared and confidently came to negotiate. I frowned, asked back suspiciously, "About what?" Andrew reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and waved it before me. His voice lowered so no one else could hear. He said, "I'll give Lucas $50,000. Tell Lucas to change his testimony." Blood rushed to my head when I realized he was trying to bribe my child to change his testimony in court. I looked at Andrew, the brother I had once admired as a child, and no longer recognized him. The man in front of me was just a calculating schemer, willing to do anything to escape punishment, including buying off a 14-year-old child. I shook my head, feeling both disgusted and sad. After silence, I looked into Andrew's eyes and asked softly, "You know what I regret most?" Andrew frowned and asked back curiously, "What?" I leaned closer, my voice dropping low, each word slow and clear. "That I didn't swing the bat into your mouth to shut you up for good." Andrew's eyes widened in shock, and before he could react, I had slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a definitive declaration that all negotiations were over. I saw Andrew standing there for a few seconds through the window, his face red with anger and humiliation. Then he turned around, walking heavily toward the car parked on the street. In that moment, I realized that the brotherhood between us had died long ago, and there was no chance of salvaging it. A month after the incident, Andrew's trial finally occurred at the county courthouse. The courtroom was packed that day. Andrew sat next to his defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit from a prestigious law firm in Billings. His wife and son sat right behind him, their faces tense. Next to them were my parents. Clearly, they had chosen sides. I sat with Erica and Lucas on the other side of the courtroom. My son, although still in pain when moving forcefully, had recovered considerably after a month. Our lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and determined eyes, put his hand on my shoulder and nodded encouragingly. The trial began with the usual procedures, then came the evidence presentation. The prosecutor showed the video from my home security camera, clearly recording the moment Andrew swung the baseball bat into Lucas's back. Gasps of shock rang throughout the courtroom as people witnessed that scene. Then came the testimony phase. Lucas stood on the witness stand, firm and much more mature than his 14 years. The boy recounted the incident clearly, without wavering, from Jason taking the bike without permission, to Andrew threatening and finally attacking him. Andrew's defense attorney tried to undermine Lucas's testimony, implying that the boy had shown disrespect to adults. But Lucas didn't waver, and the other witnesses, Justin, Brandon, and Uncle Kevin, confirmed that Lucas's version of the story was true. When it was my turn to take the witness stand, I honestly admitted to attacking Andrew after seeing him hit my son. But what completely changed the course of the trial was when the prosecutor presented unexpected evidence. A video from the security camera in front of my house, recording Andrew holding an envelope of money, coming to offer a bribe for Lucas to change his testimony. The entire courtroom suddenly erupted in amazement. I saw my parents' faces go pale. Christina buried her face in her hands, while Jason looked down at the floor, avoiding everyone's eyes. Andrew, for the first time throughout the trial, lost his confidence. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the judge announced the verdict. Andrew was convicted of assaulting a minor with a weapon, causing serious injury, and attempting to bribe a witness. He received a 5-year prison sentence and had to pay $100,000 in compensation to Lucas. I was convicted of assault, but with mitigating circumstances of acting under extreme provocation to protect my child. I received a 1-year suspended sentence and had to pay $40,000 in compensation to Andrew. A strange sense of relief washed over me when the judge banged the gavel, ending the trial. Not because I had escaped imprisonment, but because justice had finally been served. As we left the courtroom, my father suddenly appeared in the hallway. He blocked my path, his eyes cold and hard. Without greetings, without any sign of father-son affection, he just looked straight into my eyes and said with a low voice full of threat, "Remember this day." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with the feeling that this war was far from over, that this hatred would continue to smolder in our family for years to come. In that moment, watching my father's figure walking away, I understood that to protect my child, I had to sacrifice the relationship with the very person who gave birth to me. 3 years have passed since that fateful trial. Many things have changed in our family's life. Lucas is now 17, preparing for his senior year in high school. The physical wounds healed long ago, although sometimes he feels slight pain in his ribs when the weather changes. Though he hasn't forgotten what happened, Lucas never mentions what occurred. Mia, now 15, has grown into a strong girl. Although she was too young to understand everything when the incident happened, what occurred left a deep mark and shaped her character. Andrew is still serving his prison sentence. He has 2 more years left, and my family is considering moving to another city. I fear he still harbors hatred toward us for what happened. As for my parents, we completely cut off contact after that trial day. Kevin, Justin, and Brandon are the only ones from the old family we still keep in touch with. Kevin regularly visits, bringing small gifts for the kids and cheerful stories. Justin, Brandon, and their families periodically host barbecue weekends with us and take the kids camping in the summer. Looking back, I don't regret the decision to protect my son. If I could turn back time, I would still do the same thing, perhaps with less violence, but with the same determination, because ultimately, it wasn't a choice between family and children, but between doing what's right and what's easy. My story isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about setting boundaries and understanding that sometimes, to protect your own family, you must be willing to cut toxic relationships, even if the people closest to you. And through Mike's story, the friend I mentioned at the beginning of this story, I want to tell you one thing. Be strong and stand up to protect your child, no matter who you're facing. When your child is threatened or hurt, don't worry about losing favor with relatives. Don't worry about face or family traditions. Children need to know that their parents are ready to face the whole world to keep them safe. That's real love, and that's our most sacred responsibility as parents. Do you agree with my viewpoint? Or do you have a different perspective on protecting your children? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below this story. I'll read and respond to all of them. My story ends here. If this story touches your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this story. Thank you for following this long story.